Sarah Mitchell pushed her baby stroller through the crowded corridors of Heathrow Airport, her heart racing with each step. The wheels clicked rhythmically against the polished floor as she navigated between rushing passengers and towering luggage carts. Inside the stroller, her 6-month-old daughter Emma slept peacefully, completely unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold around them. The morning had started like any other. Sarah, a single mother from Manchester, had received an unexpected phone call from her sister in Spain. There had been a family emergency, and she needed to travel immediately. With barely enough time to pack, she had thrown together a few essentials for herself and Emma, grabbed the stroller and rushed to catch the first available flight to Madrid. Now standing in the security line that seemed to stretch endlessly before her, Sarah felt the weight of exhaustion settling into her shoulders. She had been up all night worrying about her family situation, and the stress was beginning to show. Her hands trembled slightly as she fumbled through her handbag, searching for their passports and boarding passes. The airport buzzed with its usual morning energy. Business travelers tapped impatiently on their phones, families juggled crying, children and oversized suitcases, and tourists clutched their guidebooks with nervous excitement. The constant announcements echoed through the terminal, mixing with the sound of rolling luggage and animated conversations in dozens of different languages. Sarah glanced at her watch and felt a knot form in her stomach. The boarding time was approaching faster than she had anticipated, and the security line was moving at a snail's pace. She gently rocked the stroller back and forth, hoping to keep Emma asleep for as long as possible. The last thing she needed was a crying baby while trying to navigate airport security. Behind her in line, she noticed a distinguished-looking man in an impeccably tailored uniform. His posture was rigid and professional, and there was something about his bearing that suggested military training. She caught glimpses of insignia on his uniform that she didn't recognize, but there was an unmistakable air of authority about him. He stood perfectly still, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd with the practiced awareness of someone trained in security. As the line inched forward, Sarah began to feel increasingly anxious. She had traveled with Emma before, but never alone, and never under such stressful circumstances. The stroller felt heavier with each step, and she found herself second-guessing everything she had packed. Had she brought enough diapers? Was Emma's formula properly sealed? Did she have all the necessary documentation for traveling with an infant? The security checkpoint loomed ahead, with its maze of metal detectors, X-ray machines, and stern-faced personnel. Sarah watched as other passengers ahead of her went through the routine process of removing shoes, emptying pockets, and placing belongings in plastic bins. Some sailed through without incident, while others were pulled aside for additional screening that seemed to take forever. When it was finally her turn, Sarah lifted Emma from the stroller and held her close while folding the stroller for the X-ray machine. The baby stirred slightly but remained asleep, her tiny fingers curled around the fabric of Sarah's sweater. The security officer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled at them both and gestured for Sarah to proceed through the metal detector. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until Sarah reached for the stroller on the other side of the X-ray machine. The security officer operating the machine suddenly called out to her colleague, pointing at something on the screen. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she watched them exchange concerned glances and whisper to each other in hushed tones. The distinguished man in uniform, who had been quietly observing the entire process, suddenly stepped forward. Sarah now realized he was part of some kind of royal security detail, based on the deference shown to him by the airport staff. His trained eyes had been watching every passenger carefully, and something about Sarah's stroller had caught his attention. Without warning, he raised his hand in a commanding gesture, signaling for Sarah to stop. His voice was firm, but not unkind as he approached her. The entire security area seemed to freeze in that moment, with other passengers craning their necks to see what was happening. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as she realized she had somehow become the center of attention. The royal guard's expression was serious but professional as he examined the stroller more closely. Sarah's mind raced, trying to understand what could possibly be wrong. She had packed nothing unusual, nothing that should cause any kind of security concern. Emma was just a normal baby with normal baby things in a normal stroller. But as the guard continued his inspection, Sarah noticed other security personnel beginning to gather around them. Radio chatter filled the air, and she could see that some kind of protocol was being activated. The casual atmosphere of the security checkpoint had transformed into something much more serious and official. Other passengers in line began to murmur among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Sarah felt exposed and vulnerable, standing there with her sleeping baby while uniformed officials examined her belongings with increasing intensity. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but something about the guard's demeanor suggested that silence was the better choice. The tension in the air was palpable as the royal guard reached toward the bottom compartment of the stroller. His movements were careful and deliberate, as if he was handling something potentially dangerous. Sarah watched in growing horror as his expression changed from professional concern to something approaching alarm. Whatever was about to happen next would change everything for Sarah and Emma, turning what should have been a routine journey into something none of them could have anticipated. The royal guard's hand moved slowly toward the storage compartment beneath Emma's stroller, his fingers steady despite the growing tension around them. Sarah watched in complete bewilderment as more security personnel appeared, forming a loose circle around their location. The normal bustle of the airport security checkpoint had given way to an eerie quiet, broken only by the distant sound of announcements and the soft beeping of metal detectors. Captain James Morrison of the Royal Protection Unit had been traveling incognito, returning from a sensitive diplomatic mission in Eastern Europe. His trained eyes had spotted something during the X-ray screening that didn't match the typical profile of baby supplies. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, even when dealing with seemingly innocent situations like a young mother traveling with her infant. Sarah's voice finally found itself trembling with confusion and growing fear. She asked what was wrong, why they were treating her like some kind of criminal. Emma began to stir in her arms, sensing the tension through her mother's rigid posture and rapid heartbeat. The baby's eyes fluttered open, and she made soft cooing, sounds that seemed almost surreal in the charged atmosphere. Captain Morrison looked up at Sarah with professional sympathy, recognizing the genuine confusion in her eyes. He had dealt with countless security situations, and his experience told him that this young mother was not a threat. However, protocol demanded that he investigate further, regardless of his personal assessment of the situation. The X-ray operator called out to Morrison, pointing at the screen where the stroller's image was still displayed. There, clearly visible, in the lower storage area, was a dense object that didn't match any typical baby item. It was roughly rectangular, with internal structures that suggested either electronics or something potentially more sinister. The imaging technology couldn't definitively identify the object, but its placement and density were enough to warrant immediate investigation. Other passengers in the security line were now being redirected to alternative checkpoints as the situation escalated. Airport security supervisors arrived on scene, and Sarah could hear radio communications crackling with code words and official jargon that she didn't understand. The professional efficiency of everyone involved only made her feel more isolated and frightened. Morrison carefully lifted the stroller and placed it on a separate inspection table. His movements were methodical and deliberate, following procedures that had been drilled into him through years of training. He examined the exterior of the stroller first, checking for any obvious signs of tampering or unusual modifications. Everything appeared normal from the outside, which only deepened the mystery. Sarah tried to remember everything she had packed that morning. In her rush to leave, she had grabbed items from various places around her flat. There were diapers, bottles, a few toys, some extra clothes for Emma, and her own emergency supplies. Nothing that should cause this level of concern. Nothing that could possibly be mistaken for something dangerous or suspicious. The storage compartment was secured with a simple zipper that Morrison opened with careful precision. As the zipper came undone, he peered inside to see the usual collection of baby supplies scattered throughout the space. Bottles, diapers, wet wipes, and a few small toys were visible on the surface. But underneath these innocent items, wrapped in a soft baby blanket, was something that didn't belong. Morrison's expression grew more serious as he carefully moved the baby supplies aside. His fingers touched something hard and rectangular, definitely not made of the soft materials typically associated with infant care. The weight and texture suggested metal, and there was a slight rattling sound when he lifted it, indicating moving parts inside. The surrounding security team tensed as Morrison began to unwrap the mystery object. Sarah watched in growing horror, realizing that something was terribly wrong but still having no idea what it could be. She held Emma closer, the baby now fully awake and beginning to fuss at the unusual situation surrounding them. As the blanket fell away, Morrison found himself staring at an object that made his blood run cold. It was a military-grade device, sophisticated and clearly not something that belonged in a baby stroller. The implications were staggering, and he immediately activated emergency protocols, signaling for the area to be evacuated and for specialized units to be called in. Sarah saw the change in Morrison's demeanor and felt panic rising in her chest. She demanded to know what was happening, what they had found, insisting that she had no idea what could possibly be in her stroller that would cause such a reaction. Her voice rose with desperation as she realized that she might be suspected of something terrible. The device in Morrison's hands was unlike anything he had seen in civilian contexts. It bore markings and serial numbers that suggested military origin, and its construction indicated that it was designed for purposes far beyond anything an ordinary traveler would possess. The discovery transformed what had begun as a routine security check into a potential national security incident. Emma began to cry, sensing her mother's distress and reacting to the tension surrounding them. The sound of the baby's tears seemed to emphasize the surreal nature of the situation, contrasting the innocence of a mother and child with the serious security implications of what had been discovered. Morrison immediately radioed for backup and requested that explosive detection specialists be brought to the scene. While he didn't believe the device was immediately dangerous, protocol demanded that every precaution be taken. The area around them was quietly but efficiently cleared, with other passengers being rerouted without explanation. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand how such an object could have ended up in her stroller. She had packed everything herself that morning, and she was certain that she had never seen this device before in her life. The only logical explanation was that someone else had placed it there, but when and how remained complete mysteries. As specialized security teams began to arrive, Sarah realized that her simple journey to visit family had become something much more complicated and dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The specialized bomb disposal unit arrived within minutes, their heavy protective gear and serious expressions sending waves of panic through the few remaining passengers in the area. Sarah watched in growing horror as these experts approached, her innocent baby stroller with the same caution they would use for a confirmed explosive device. Emma continued crying in her arms, the baby's distress adding to the surreal atmosphere of the unfolding crisis. Detective Inspector Helen Walsh from the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Unit had been called to the scene immediately after Captain Morrison's discovery. Her expertise in identifying suspicious devices and coordinating emergency responses made her the perfect person to handle this delicate situation. As she examined the device that Morrison had carefully extracted from the stroller, her expression grew increasingly grave. The object was approximately 6 inches long, 3 inches wide, and made of brushed aluminum with several small LED indicators along one edge. It bore military specification markings and serial numbers that suggested it was government property, possibly from a classified project. Most concerning of all, the device appeared to be some kind of advanced tracking and communication equipment, far beyond anything available to civilian users. Sarah stood frozen as Walsh approached her, the detective's voice calm but firm as she began the questioning process. Sarah insisted repeatedly that she had never seen the device before, that she had no idea how it could have gotten into her stroller. Her answers were consistent and genuine, showing all the signs of someone truly bewildered by the situation, rather than someone attempting to conceal involvement in a conspiracy. Walsh had dealt with enough genuine terror suspects to recognize the difference between deception and authentic confusion. Sarah's body language, her emotional responses, and the way she held her baby all suggested that she was an unwitting victim rather than an active participant in whatever was happening. However, Protocol demanded that every possibility be thoroughly investigated. The airport's crisis management team had quietly activated their emergency procedures, rerouting flights and passengers away from the affected terminal area without causing widespread panic. Most travelers remained unaware that a potential security threat was being investigated just meters away from their normal activities. The professional efficiency of everyone involved was remarkable, but Sarah felt increasingly isolated and frightened as the investigation continued around her. Captain Morrison worked closely with Walsh to piece together the timeline of events. He reviewed security footage from earlier that morning, tracking Sarah's movements through the airport from the moment she arrived. The cameras showed her proceeding normally through check-in and security screening, with no unusual interactions or suspicious behavior. However, they also revealed something troubling that neither Sarah nor the investigators had initially considered. The footage showed that Sarah had stopped briefly at a coffee shop near the departure gate, leaving her stroller unattended for approximately 3 minutes while she ordered a drink and used the restroom. During that time, the cameras captured several people passing near the stroller, any one of whom could have placed the device inside without being noticed. The busy environment and distracted travelers created the perfect opportunity for someone to plant evidence or contraband without detection. This discovery shifted the entire investigation. Rather than treating Sarah as a suspect, the team began to view her as potentially the victim of someone else's scheme. The device could have been placed in her stroller by someone who intended to retrieve it later, or by someone who wanted to use her as an unwitting carrier for illegal or dangerous materials. Walsh immediately ordered a comprehensive review of all passengers who had been in the vicinity of the coffee shop during the critical time period. Security cameras captured dozens of faces, and each person would need to be identified and investigated. The task was enormous, but the potential implications made it absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, the bomb disposal experts had completed their initial assessment of the device. Their equipment confirmed that it was not an explosive, which brought immediate relief to everyone involved. However, their analysis revealed something equally concerning. The device appeared to be a sophisticated military-grade tracking and communication unit, possibly designed for covert surveillance or coordination activities. The serial numbers on the device were immediately run through military databases, and the results sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The equipment was registered to a classified military project that had been reported stolen from a secure facility 3 weeks earlier. The theft had been kept secret while military investigators worked to track down the missing items. But now it appeared that at least one piece of the stolen equipment had somehow made its way into a civilian airport. Sarah felt a mix of relief and continued fear as she learned that she was no longer considered a suspect, but rather a victim of someone else's criminal activity. However, the implications were still serious. Someone had used her and her innocent baby as unwitting accomplices in what appeared to be a major security breach involving stolen military equipment. The investigation team realized they were dealing with something much larger than a simple security violation. The theft of classified military equipment, its appearance in a civilian airport, and the sophisticated method used to conceal it suggested the involvement of professional criminals, or potentially even foreign agents. Walsh assigned protective details to Sarah and Emma while the investigation continued. Although they were no longer suspects, their safety could not be guaranteed while the real perpetrators remained at large. The criminals who had planted the device might attempt to retrieve it, or might view Sarah as a potential witness who needed to be silenced. As the scope of the investigation expanded, Sarah began to understand that her simple trip to visit family had accidentally placed her at the center of what could be an international security incident. The device in her stroller was just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous situation that none of them fully understood yet. The airport remained on high alert as investigators worked to identify everyone who had been near Sarah's stroller during the critical window of opportunity. Each face captured on camera represented a potential lead in what was rapidly becoming one of the most significant security investigations of the year. The investigation team worked through the night, analyzing security footage and cross-referencing passenger manifests with intelligence databases. In a secure room deep within Heathrow's administrative complex, Detective Inspector Walsh coordinated with multiple agencies as the scope of the case continued to expand. Captain Morrison remained involved as a military liaison, his expertise in classified equipment proving invaluable as more details emerged about the stolen device. Sarah and Emma had been moved to a comfortable but secure area within the airport, where they were provided with food, baby supplies, and a place to rest while investigators worked around the clock. Despite the comfortable accommodations, Sarah felt like a prisoner, unable to leave or contact her family without supervision. The stress of the situation was taking its toll on both mother and baby, with Emma becoming increasingly fussy and difficult to soothe. The breakthrough came at 3 o'clock in the morning when facial recognition software identified one of the individuals who had been near Sarah's stroller during the critical time period. The system matched a face from the airport cameras to Marcus Petrov, a Bulgarian national with previous connections to arms trafficking and industrial espionage. Petrov had entered the UK on a tourist visa 2 weeks earlier, but intelligence suggested his real purpose was far from recreational. Walsh immediately activated international cooperation protocols, reaching out to Bulgarian authorities and Europol to gather more information about Petrov's activities and associates. The response was alarming. Petrov was suspected of working with a sophisticated criminal organization that specialized in stealing and selling military technology to the highest bidders. The stolen device from Sarah's stroller was likely just one piece of a much larger operation. Captain Morrison's military contacts provided additional disturbing information about the stolen equipment. The device was part of a new generation of battlefield communication systems designed to coordinate military operations in hostile environments. In the wrong hands, such technology could be used to disrupt legitimate military communications or to coordinate terrorist activities with unprecedented precision and security. The investigation team realized they were racing against time. Petrov and his associates had likely planned to retrieve the device from Sarah's stroller during her journey, possibly at her destination airport in Madrid. With their plan disrupted by the security discovery, they might attempt more direct and dangerous methods to recover their valuable stolen property or eliminate witnesses who could identify them. Airport security footage from the past several hours revealed additional concerning developments. Several individuals had been observed conducting surveillance of the secure area where Sarah and Emma were being held. These watchers were careful to avoid direct camera angles, but their coordinated movements and professional surveillance techniques suggested they were part of Petrov's organization. Walsh made the difficult decision to move Sarah and Emma to an even more secure location away from the airport entirely. The safe house was a nondescript building in central London, staffed by armed protection officers and equipped with advanced security systems. For Sarah, the move represented another step further away from her normal life and deeper into a world of international crime and espionage that she never could have imagined. As they prepared for the transfer, Walsh briefed Sarah on the full scope of what they had uncovered. The young mother listened in shock as she learned about the sophisticated criminal organization, the stolen military equipment, and the international implications of what had been hidden in her baby stroller. The realization that she and Emma had been unwitting pawns in such a serious criminal enterprise was overwhelming. The journey to the safe house took place under heavy security, with multiple unmarked vehicles and constant communication with command centers. Sarah held Emma close as they traveled through the pre-dawn streets of London, both of them now under the protection of people whose job it was to deal with the most dangerous criminals and terrorists in the world. At the safe house, Sarah was introduced to Agent Rebecca Turner from MI5, Britain's domestic intelligence agency. Turner's involvement signaled that the case had implications for national security, potentially involving foreign intelligence services or terrorist organizations. Her first priority was ensuring Sarah's safety, but she also needed to debrief her thoroughly about everything that had happened in the days leading up to the airport incident. Turner's questions were detailed and methodical, covering every aspect of Sarah's recent activities, her travel plans, and anyone who might have had access to her stroller or knowledge of her movements. The interview process revealed several disturbing possibilities about how the criminals had selected Sarah as their unwitting carrier. The investigation had determined that Sarah's travel plans had been booked online just hours before her departure, in response to the family emergency phone call. Turner's analysis suggested that the criminals might have been monitoring online booking systems or communication networks, allowing them to identify last-minute travelers who could serve as unwitting carriers for their contraband. This possibility opened up frightening new dimensions to the case. If criminals could monitor booking systems and communication networks in real time, they might have the capability to identify and exploit ordinary citizens for criminal purposes on a massive scale. The implications for national security and public safety were staggering. Meanwhile, international law enforcement agencies were coordinating efforts to track down Petrov and his associates. The stolen military equipment represented just one aspect of their criminal activities, and investigators were beginning to uncover evidence of a much larger network of theft, smuggling, and espionage operations spanning multiple countries. Sarah found herself at the center of an international investigation that seemed to grow more complex and dangerous with each passing hour. What had started as a simple family emergency had transformed into something that threatened to change her life forever, while forces beyond her control worked to unravel a criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond anything she could have imagined. The safe house became her temporary home as investigators worked around the clock to ensure her safety and gather the evidence needed to bring the criminals to justice. Emma seemed to adapt better to the strange situation than her mother, but Sarah knew that both their lives had been permanently altered by the events that began with a routine security check at Heathrow Airport. 3 days into her stay at the safe house, Sarah's world was turned upside down once again when Agent Turner received urgent intelligence that changed everything about the case. The phone call that had originally prompted Sarah's emergency travel to Spain had been fabricated. There was no family emergency, no sister in distress, and no legitimate reason for Sarah's last-minute trip to Madrid. Someone had orchestrated the entire scenario to manipulate her into becoming an unwitting courier. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been carefully selected and manipulated by sophisticated criminals who had researched her background, identified her vulnerabilities, and created an elaborate deception to exploit her family loyalty. The voice on the phone that morning had been skilled enough to mimic her sister's speech patterns and mannerisms, complete with personal details that only family members should have known. Turner's investigation revealed the sophisticated nature of the deception. The criminals had gained access to Sarah's personal communications, social media accounts, and family information through a combination of hacking and social engineering. They knew about her close relationship with her sister in Spain, her financial struggles as a single mother, and her tendency to respond immediately to family emergencies without questioning the details. The fake emergency call had been designed to create exactly the scenario the criminals needed. By forcing Sarah to travel on short notice, they ensured that she would be rushed, distracted, and less likely to notice if someone tampered with her belongings. The coffee shop stop at the airport had been anticipated and planned for, giving them the perfect opportunity to plant the stolen military device in her stroller. Sarah felt violated and manipulated in ways she had never experienced before. These criminals had invaded every aspect of her privacy, studying her like a laboratory specimen to identify the most effective way to use her for their purposes. The realization that strangers had been watching her, learning about her family, and planning to exploit her maternal instincts was deeply disturbing. The investigation team was impressed by the sophistication of the operation, even as they worked to dismantle it. The criminals had demonstrated advanced technical capabilities, detailed planning, and the resources to execute complex deceptions across international boundaries. This was not the work of petty criminals, but of a highly organized group with significant financial backing and technical expertise. Captain Morrison's military contacts provided additional intelligence that painted an even more concerning picture. The stolen military equipment was part of a larger theft that had included multiple advanced communication devices, encryption technology, and battlefield coordination systems. The device found in Sarah's stroller was worth hundreds of thousands of pounds on the black market, but its real value lay in the military secrets it contained. Analysis of the device revealed that it had been modified since being stolen from the military facility. Someone with advanced technical knowledge had altered its software and hardware, possibly to extract classified information or to adapt it for use in criminal activities. The modification suggested that the thieves had access to highly skilled engineers and sophisticated equipment. The international dimension of the case continued to expand as investigators traced connections between Marcus Petrov and criminal organizations in multiple countries. The network appeared to specialize in stealing advanced military technology and selling it to various buyers, including hostile foreign governments and terrorist organizations. Sarah's case was just one small part of a much larger threat to international security. Turner received authorization to offer Sarah and Emma placement in the Witness Protection Program. Given the level of threat they faced from the criminal organization, the offer came with both relief and terror for Sarah, who realized that accepting protection might mean giving up her old life entirely. Everything she had worked for, every relationship she had built, and every aspect of her identity might have to be sacrificed for their safety. The criminals had demonstrated that they knew intimate details about Sarah's life, her family, and her routines. Even if they were captured, there was no guarantee that other members of the organization wouldn't seek revenge against the woman who had unwittingly disrupted their operation. The stolen device had been worth far more than money to these criminals, and they had invested significant time and resources in their elaborate scheme to transport it. Sarah spent sleepless nights weighing her options while holding Emma close. The baby had adapted remarkably well to their strange circumstances, but Sarah worried about the long-term effects of such upheaval on her daughter's development. How could she explain to Emma, when she was older, that they had to abandon their entire life because criminals had chosen them as unwitting participants in an international conspiracy? The investigation team worked around the clock to build a case against the criminal organization, hoping to neutralize the threat before Sarah and Emma would need to disappear into witness protection. Simultaneous raids were being planned across IUR, multiple countries targeting known associates of Petrov and attempting to recover the remaining stolen military equipment. Turner kept Sarah informed of the investigation's progress, but each update seemed to reveal new complications and dangers. The criminal organization was larger and more sophisticated than initially believed, with tentacles reaching into legitimate businesses, government agencies, and military installations across Europe and beyond. As the fifth day at the safe house dawned, Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her life: accept witness protection and disappear forever with Emma, or risk returning to their normal life while dangerous criminals remained at large. The choice would determine not only their immediate safety but the entire future trajectory of their lives. The innocent morning when she had received the fake emergency call seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than a week. Sarah had learned that her quiet life as a single mother offered no protection against the sophisticated criminals who operated in the shadows of the modern world, exploiting ordinary people for extraordinary crimes that threatened international security and stability. The coordinated international raids took place at dawn on the seventh day, with law enforcement agencies in 6 countries simultaneously striking at locations connected to the criminal organization. Agent Turner monitored the operations from the Safe House Command Center, keeping Sarah updated as reports came in from around Europe. The scale of the operation was unprecedented, involving hundreds of officers and agents working to dismantle what had revealed itself to be one of the most sophisticated military technology theft rings ever discovered. Marcus Petrov was arrested in a luxury apartment in Barcelona, where he had been coordinating the organization's activities while maintaining the appearance of a wealthy tourist. Spanish police found encrypted communication equipment, detailed surveillance files on potential courier targets like Sarah, and evidence of the organization's extensive network of contacts in criminal and intelligence circles worldwide. The raids revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that had ensnared Sarah and Emma. The criminal organization had been operating for over 3 years, stealing advanced military technology from NATO countries and selling it to the highest bidders. They had developed sophisticated methods for identifying and exploiting ordinary citizens as unwitting couriers, turning innocent travelers into unknowing participants in international crimes. Sarah watched the news coverage with a mixture of relief and amazement as she learned about the dozens of arrests and the recovery of millions of pounds worth of stolen military equipment. The device that had been hidden in Emma's stroller was just one piece of a massive puzzle that included advanced radar systems, encrypted communication networks, and prototype weapons technology that could have changed the balance of power in conflicts around the world. Captain Morrison visited the safe house to brief Sarah on the military significance of what had been recovered. The stolen technology represented years of research and development by defense contractors and military engineers, and its loss to hostile forces could have compromised the safety of British and Allied military personnel in active combat zones. Her unwitting role in the investigation had potentially saved countless lives by preventing the technology from reaching its intended buyers. The investigation revealed that the criminal organization had been preparing to execute similar operations, involving dozens of other innocent travelers. Sarah's case had been a test run for a much larger scheme that would have used ordinary families as unknowing carriers for massive quantities of stolen military equipment. The disruption of their operation at Heathrow had prevented a security disaster of unprecedented proportions. Agent Turner informed Sarah that the evidence gathered during the raids was sufficient to prosecute the entire leadership of the criminal organization, effectively dismantling their network and eliminating the threat they had posed. The success of the operation meant that Sarah and Emma would no longer need witness protection, as the criminals who had targeted them were now either in custody or had fled to countries where they posed no immediate danger. However, the experience had changed Sarah in fundamental ways that she was only beginning to understand. The knowledge that sophisticated criminals could invade her privacy, manipulate her emotions, and use her love for her family as a weapon against her had shattered her sense of security and normalcy. The world now seemed like a much more dangerous and unpredictable place than she had ever imagined. The debriefing process continued for several more days as investigators worked to understand every aspect of how the criminal organization had operated. Sarah's detailed account of the fake emergency call and her travel preparations provided crucial insights that helped authorities identify similar schemes that had been used against other victims in different countries. Sarah learned that she had not been randomly selected, but had been specifically chosen after months of surveillance and research. The criminals had identified her as an ideal target because of her family situation, her travel history, her online behavior, and her predictable responses to emotional manipulation. The revelation that she had been watched and studied for so long was deeply unsettling, but it also helped her understand that she had been the victim of extraordinarily sophisticated criminal planning rather than simple bad luck. When Sarah and Emma were finally able to leave the safe house and return to their normal life in Manchester, the transition proved more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Sarah found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, suspicious of strangers who paid too much attention to her, and unable to trust phone calls or unexpected communications. The trauma of learning how easily her life could be manipulated had left psychological scars that would take time to heal. Emma seemed to bounce back from their ordeal with the resilience of childhood, but Sarah worried about the long-term effects of their week in protective custody. The baby had been exposed to stress and disruption during crucial developmental months, and Sarah was determined to provide extra stability and security to help Emma recover from experiences she was too young to understand, but old enough to have been affected by. Captain Morrison and Agent Turner both remained in contact with Sarah as the legal proceedings against the criminal organization moved forward. She would eventually be called to testify in court, but the extensive evidence gathered during the raids meant that her testimony would be just one piece of an overwhelming case against the defendants. 6 months later, as Sarah watched Emma take her first steps in their small Manchester flat, she reflected on how much their lives had changed since that morning at Heathrow Airport. The experience had taught her that ordinary people could become caught up in extraordinary circumstances beyond their control, but it had also shown her the dedication and skill of the people whose job it was to protect society from threats that most citizens never knew existed. The criminal organization had been completely dismantled, with its leaders facing decades in prison for crimes that spanned multiple continents and threatened international security. The stolen military technology had been recovered and returned to its rightful owners, and the methods used to exploit innocent travelers had been exposed and countered by law enforcement agencies worldwide. Sarah's ordeal had ended, but its impact would continue to shape her understanding of the world and her place in it. She had learned that even the most ordinary life could intersect with international conspiracies, and that the simple act of pushing a baby stroller through an airport could lead to discoveries that changed the course of criminal investigations spanning multiple countries and agencies.